So let's take a look at that first, and then we'll come back.
At the last CDRB meeting, I believe Member Lamers had requested that staff provide some information regarding a recent Minnesota Supreme Court case that changed the standards that cities can use for the granting of variances. And mainly, staff just wanted to provide this information for your information or for your use. And if you have questions, we're here to answer them. But in summary, the basic point of what has changed is in the past, cities could grant variances as long as the use was reasonable. The city or the Supreme Court has now reinterpreted that statute to mean that there can not be any other reasonable use.
Covered a little bit about this particular issue having to do with variances. And of course, at a recent City Council workshop, the city attorney indicated to the council that the Supreme Court of Minnesota had, of course, reinterpreted how cities can look at variances. And the program, I had actually given my understanding, having been an attorney who has brought requests for variances before municipalities in the past, other municipalities, not Maplewood. And I, of course, beg to differ with what the original standard was, because I don't think that the state law and the standard has actually changed whatsoever. That I believe actually the Supreme Court ruling has reaffirmed what the standard has always been. But what it appears is that Maplewood has been perhaps has used a different standard in granting its variances. So here we are at the Design Review Board meeting, and the commission members had asked for an update on what it was with regard to this case and what was presented to the City Council with regard to variances and how they should be reviewed. So anyway, so we are hearing then one of the planners giving what he has been told by this city attorney with regard to variances. And he is saying that originally Maplewood and cities were able to grant variances as long as they were reasonable. Now, of course, I do not think that that's what the state statute says, but let's continue on and hear what else he has to say.
Put to the land in order to grant the variance. So the standard for granting the variance has been tightened and more strict. As the staff memo included information about that community standards, so our comprehensive plan, master plans can also play into what is the city expecting for a parcel to use. And if you were kind of tracking the Shores application, that did have a variance, and this Supreme Court case was handed down in the midst of that review. So it did change the way that staff in the city had to consider that variance request.
The case here in front of me that is being referred to. And one of the things that the Supreme Court says is that the appellate court was relying on a decision in some other case that they had, which of course were they an interpreted, because in order to give a variance to a property owner who applies for it, you have to have an undue hardship, and that's one of the elements you have to prove. And of course there's a couple of other elements too that we will talk about in a little bit here. But the first most important one is undue hardship. That because of this undue hardship that is of no fault of the property owner, because of some particular special characteristic of the land or some other aspect that the landowner has no control over, the landowner is not able to use their property. And the Supreme Court in this case says that the appellate court that was being looked at there, that they interpreted undue hardship section of Minnesota Statute 462.357 subdivision 6 as requiring a variance applicant to show that the property owner would like to use the property in a reasonable manner that is prohibited by the ordinance, and that the city urges, in this case here, that this city was urging that the Supreme Court embrace the interpretation of undue hardship from that case to mean that the reasonable standard is the standard that this should be used in figuring out it's an undue hardship. So the undue hardship, that if it's a reasonable use that, first of all, they're saying if it's a reasonable use, that's a way to overcome the hardship issue, especially if that hardship issue is created by an ordinance. Well, here's the issue, is that communities put ordinances in place for a reason. They put ordinances in place because they want that to be the laws by which everybody is governed by. Whether or not that has to do with the setbacks, whether or not that has to do with the side yards on either side of a building, how high your building may be, these different kinds of parameters that are placed in law, so that way you have maybe a community standard that has been established by law, by ordinance. And if indeed that it was the ordinance that creates that undue hardship for you, well, then basically it's saying, well, if there's an ordinance that you don't like for some reason, and you can't do what you want because there's an ordinance that says you can't, if you can convince your elected body that you really have a reasonable use, even though it violates their ordinance, that they should give you a variance, and that they should give you a pass on having to comply with what the ordinance is. Well, the Supreme Court is saying that's not what an undue hardship is all about. It's not whether or not that the ordinance stands in your way of being able to do what you want. That's not the undue hardship. That there's actually other kinds, that's not the measure about whether or not that you can overcome undue hardship because your use is reasonable given what it is you want to do. So anyway, let's take a look and have a little bit more of our film footage and see what else he has to say.
Its analysis and why the city was able to then, the city council did approve that variance request, and that did heavily rely on what the community standards were for that parcel, and that the city's expectation was for a certain type of density and housing type, and that anything less than that would not be reasonable for from the city's perspective. So it just heightens that analysis that the city has to undertake. Also included is the League of Minnesota Cities response to the Supreme Court case and some recommendations. The League is recommending that cities don't go out and change a bunch of their code items because this could be fixed with the state statute change during the next legislative session. Like counties, nothing has changed in their ability to grant variances. It's kind of a minutia of the way the state statute is written, where cities are now held to this higher standard. So there is a good chance that some action will be taken by the end of 2011, that then cities would go back to the type of analysis that they were using for variances. In the meantime, though, they are encouraging cities to use tools like conditional use permits for planned unit developments, which the city of Maplewood just recently revised their planned unit development ordinance that did provide some more flexibility, not because of a response to a Supreme Court case, it's just that the Planning Commission had wanted to tackle the PUD and revise some language.
So of course, one of the things that they're saying here is that if for some reason you're looking to do something with your property that because of the various ordinances that you're not able to do, let's say that because of the size of your lot or the shape of the lot, and you can't meet all the requirements such as a setback from the front or this distance from this edge of the property line, or other kinds of restrictions that there might be, that maybe you need to look at, maybe it isn't so much a variance that you should apply for, because maybe that won't pass, but you can maybe use some other kind of tool that is under a planned use development, if you're doing a development such as in the Shores case, or there might be some other way. Now, one of the things that I find interesting in what is being described here and talked about by the city staff person for Maplewood is that he talks about that a property owner can come into the city, and of course that's what they do when they're looking to propose their plans, so that they can find out what the, what the ordinances might be that they are governed by, or maybe have assistance in how to put together their plans, or what are the requirements for submitting their plans. And that one of the things that he indicates, that it almost infers that if for some reason you have a use you want to put your property to that doesn't really quite fit with what the regulations are, that if the staff thinks that they approve of what use you want to do, that they will help you to figure out how to get around this idea of having to require a variance, and that maybe they might help you to suggest other ways. Now, my question, of course, is that if you are not a favored citizen of the community, or that for some reason that they have a prescribed idea of what use is allowed or not allowed, or what they would like or not like in the community, based on the perception of maybe the current council at the time or the current city management at the time, will they give you and extend to you the same kind of opportunity of being able to figure out and weigh your chances versus a variance versus a PUD? I don't know, but it was the way that it was said that led me to wonder that question, is that does that indeed then lead to susceptibility of treating some citizens differently than others? So let's continue on with the film footage here, and we'll conclude this matter.
That added flexibility allowed Metro Transit to apply for a PUD for their parking ramp as opposed to a variance. Now, we can provide that recommendation to the applicant, but at the end of the day, it's the applicant's decision to apply for a conditional use permit for a planned unit development or a variance.
Sure.
But staff does provide that information as to what's more likely to be able to work for them in the end and for the city. So just wanted to get that information out there since it was requested. If there's any questions about the specifics of the case, staff is available to answer questions. Otherwise, just look over the materials and...
Okay. Yeah, I looked at them. I didn't have anything specific. The discussion, the city council discussion on the Shores was very pointed and
So, of course, with this case, I think what it does is a couple of things. One is that the Supreme Court has re-acknowledged what indeed the standard is, and that the statute is to be read with its plain meaning without ambiguity. And that while some appellate court cases may have come to the conclusion that an undue hardship could be because that the ordinance doesn't allow you to do something that you want to do, and that you could get a variance as long as your governing body decided it was a reasonable use, that they have stated that that is not the standard, that wasn't the standard, that may have been what some courts in the appellate level actually interpreted undue hardship to mean, but that really is not what undue hardship is. And I think this is a good determination, because what I could see can happen is that if you have an elected body who has got before them an applicant who's looking for a variance, and they're saying, well, the undue hardship to me is because of this ordinance that says I can't do what I want to do, but I want you to say I don't have to comply with the law, because, well, it's a reasonable use, that it's a reasonable use that you, the elected body, have decided that you would allow to happen. Well, you could very easily have an elected body who might say, well, we prefer this use over some other use without actually having any real